Welcome to New Beginnings with Karen Delk, where we celebrate the creativity, courage, and wisdom of people creating change. We highlight those who chart new paths, make new life and career choices, and face turning points. We explore lessons that accompany changes, both welcome and unwelcome. New Beginnings covers topics from the worlds of business, education, health, and the arts. Our guests and the stories we share inspire viewers to make positive changes within their own lives and communities. Now here is our host, Karen Delk.
Welcome to New Beginnings with Karen Delk, and I am so pleased to have joining me today Mel Parker, who is the president and CEO of Take the Limits Off.
Yes, ma'am. Take the limits off.
Yeah, and you're also an author.
I am.
Working on a second book.
Working on a second book.
We're going to talk about the first book.
Oh, I look forward to that. Good.
Wonderful. Well, I am just thrilled to have you. This has come together very quickly.
Very nicely.
And very nicely.
Yes.
Yeah. So welcome again.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I have for you is, you've authored this book, which is the Mel Parker, or the Parker Principles. And it is the leadership force multipliers, the 10 force multipliers.
Yes.
So where did this concept come from?
Wow, that's a great question. It's a combination of, the Parker Principles probably start out as a concept of my way of introducing myself to my teams. I grew up with the philosophy that trust is built by knowing. We trust who we know. We tend to not trust who we don't. So when I received a new team, I would get with the new team and I'll say, well, this is me. This is what I believe in. These are my standards, and this is what you can hold me accountable to. Anytime I am not abiding by the principles I set forth to you, you have carte blanche to call me out on it. And so there was always principles, and when I started out, I was maybe 5. Then as I got more senior, it became 7 and 10 and 15. And so the principles started growing. So there was always this introduction, and this is my core belief in who I am. And then when I think about leadership force multipliers is a term that I was introduced to when I was in the military. And force multipliers are a tool or a organization that augments something, that creates something bigger. For example, in the military, the infantry's job is to seize and hold land. And so a force multiplier would be the field artillery, the air defense artillery, anything that supports that infantry in being able to do its job. And when I thought about it in the civilian sector, I used a visual of, if you have the mission of, you have a board and you have a nail to hammer into a board, you could use your hand.
Yes.
And it's probably not as efficient, but you could probably use it. And a force multiplier is supposed to be a tool. It's a hammer that you just add to your hand, where you could use the same force that you were using before, but this tool added to your hand now gives you a more productive, a more efficient manner of getting the nail into the board.
Oh, I love that.
And so it's supposed to be, not trying to change who you are. I'm a big believer in authenticity. And so I'm all about, be the leader that you are, and use these to augment, use these tools to take the leader that you are and make things better and make things greater.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. So you said you went from, 5 to 7 to 15. How did you settle on these 10?
That's a great question. When we looked at it, there was a magic number. It seemed like 5 was too few and 15 was too many. And then I started to look at, when I wrote the book, I wanted to write the book that my philosophy was, if I could give my 25-year-old self a user's manual that had all the knowledge, all the mistakes, all the should-haves, wish I did, and the things that I did and should have doubled down on, what would I put in that? So I wanted to make sure that the book would appeal to both new leaders starting out and give them the right starting concepts to grasp on and focus points, but also give the right nuances for senior leadership. So I looked at the 10 that covered the broad spectrum of leaders and that were the most general for no matter where you are in your leadership journey.
Yeah, because that was one of my questions was, is this intended for senior executives, middle managers, people who are just entering, supervising people? But what I hear you saying, it really covers all.
Yes, it was designed to be that user's manual to cover all. When we talk about trust, every leader has to focus on trust, but the nuances are different when it's you and a 5-person team and it's your first leadership job and you're starting off. Your learning part of trust is different than when you are a president or a CEO and you have 15 or 20,000 people. You have to do different things and act in a certain way to make sure you're delivering on the trust belief and you're delivering on that principle of trust. And so it's meant to connect everything, that it's a journey. And it's meant to show that this is a journey through your leadership life, and along that journey there are different tools and different best practices and different processes that you can enable to make that journey better for you.
So really, if I'm a new manager, I'll read it, I'll walk away with one set of ideas. If I get promoted to middle management, I can read it again and then have a little bit more nuanced understanding. No, that's right. Great.
And then as a new leader looking at it, you already can start to look what you would do as a middle manager, because it's going to introduce you to some advanced concepts. It's going to introduce you to some advanced thinking on the importance of building your capability, the importance of building your credibility with the team, and how to lead through credibility and not through sort of the rank on your collar, as we used to call it in the military.
Yeah. So let's kind of penetrate that. How do you lead through credibility? What is it that you have to do so that you get followers?
Sure. It's a combination of things. So I have this concept that I call CCT, which is capability, credibility, and trust. And in my mind, these 3 things create a virtuous cycle of energy, high performance, and everything associated with it. And as you are building capability with your team, you tend to, and if you're listening and you're engaging in the things that a good leader does, then you start to build that credibility with the team. And they tend to, and if trust follows that, trust is sort of that glue and that catalyst that holds everything together, and it becomes sort of that virtuous cycle that delivers on that credibility. One of my credibility lessons is, I was in the military, and so a West Point graduate, a lot of hierarchy. In the military, there's a lot of hierarchy where rank on your collar matters. I had the opportunity to attend Ranger School, and so the Rangers are sort of the high performance team in the military. They're the team that gets thrown into situations that are unplanned, and they're supposed to be able to think on their feet, to figure out whatever is happening, and to accomplish the mission at all costs. And one of the very first things that happens at Ranger School is you have to remove all the rank from your collar. You can't lead from rank. There is no rank for people in Ranger School. You get your name tag and you get U.S. Army, and then everything else is developed through your capability. It's developed through you building credibility with the people that you're trying to lead, and you creating that aura of trust. And so as I thought about that, the concept was when things were unknown, when it was volatile and complex, that the Navy SEALs, these high performance teams that are supposed to deliver no matter what in circumstances that are unplanned and unpredictable, they tend to go away from that straight hierarchy and get into this leadership. You always knew who's in charge. There's a great show on called Navy SEALs now. You always know who's in charge, but everybody has an equally strong voice at the table. You elicit everybody's opinion, and everybody has their part to play, and they understand their role in accomplishing the mission.
Yeah, and that's really not unlike business today.
That's right.
So as you described the military, which is hierarchical, business used to be heavily so.
Yes.
And now we all know who's in charge, but the leader almost takes off his rank.
That's right.
And they sit amongst the team. Some don't even have offices, particularly when you think about Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
Even, in government, Mayor Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, he kind of had a bullpen. So, business has followed that same trait. And you're right, to be able to solicit ideas and input from everyone,
That's right.
and then have the group make a decision with the final arbiter being, the leader.
The leader.
That works.
That's right.
Yeah.
And at Dell is the same way. At Dell, it doesn't matter what leader you are, everybody is in a cube. Because there's a concept that you do your best thinking when the team is involved, that offices tend to disconnect you from people. You can always go to a conference room and have a meeting, but day in and day out, you want interaction, you want connection. You want to establish ongoing relationships in a 360-degree manner. Not only the people that work for you, but the people that your peers, your customers and your constituents, but also your direct manager. And that environment fed that. It fed that innovation. It fed that fast-moving, fast-paced mentality.
Yeah, yeah. So what what principle do you think most directly affects like innovation, building on that? Because as you said, as a ranger, you were first in, had to put boots on the ground, figure out what to do, set up communication systems, block and tackle.
And accomplish the mission
And
at all costs.
accomplish the mission at all costs. Business is somewhat like that.
That's right. That's
So
exactly like that.
how what principles do you see correlating with that?
There's a lot of combination. I think the primary, so the underlying thing to every principle is trust. Because trust is that foundation, trust is that glue, trust is the catalyst. When a team has high trust, then they're not spending time trying to figure out what the hidden agendas are, they feel like they're comfortable bringing 100% of themselves to work every day, and that they can be their authentic self, and it's okay to be that. And when you have that kind of trust, then people can focus on the mission. They don't have to focus on the white noise stuff that's all around when there's a lot of distrust in the organization. And when people can focus on the mission, you get superior performance. And so I think that trust is that catalyst. That's that first point. You can't really be a great listener. You can't be very have high intellectual curiosity without having a basis in trust.
No, I think you're right about that.
And it's huge.
It is huge.
It's huge. And one of the courses that I teach is now there's all kind of data that shows that high trust organizations outperform low trust organizations by 200 or 300%.
Oh, I
Crazy
agree.
number.
I agree.
And so when people ask, well, what do we need as a competitive advantage? Well, it's not necessarily the new technology, it's not the new process. Is that if you circle back and you focus on your organizational trust, that is the one competitive advantage that's entirely in your hands. That's entirely in the leadership's hands of an organization. And when you activate that, it just changes the dynamic. And you can recruit the best. You don't lose superior talent because they're not going to leave when they are operating in a high trust organization.
Oh, you raised such good points there. A low trust organization where there's blame and shame and pointing fingers.
Oh, yes.
People are not going to contribute to that. In fact, they're using their contacts to figure out how to get out. And not to stay. And so not only do you have reputational risk, but you have, flight risk of people leaving and turning over and that kind of thing.
That's right.
But yeah, when you have high trust, you've removed, people feel safe.
They feel safe.
They feel that they can contribute.
That's right. And when you talk about innovation, that's about being courageous enough to dream, because to bring some crazy ideas, and you have to be courageous enough to fail. And people don't tend to throw stuff out there and be willing to fail in a low trust environment. You have to know that if you try this and you fail, your manager is not going to send you away, that there's going to be an after action review, there's going to be lessons learned, and then you don't repeat the same mistake again. Every great accomplishment, whether it's the telephone or anything, has happened on the heels of hundreds and hundreds of failures. And so teaching teams that failure is okay, teaching teams that failure as a part of the learning process is okay, that's how you create massive innovation. And that only happens where people feel trust, where they are willing to come to work and take off their armor and actually engage in in-depth conversation with their peers and with their teams.
Oh, you're so right about that. And I use this example, and it just comes to mind once again because of what you said. So the cleaner, 409,
Yes.
which is an all-purpose cleaner.
All-purpose cleaners, right?
Yeah, so there were 408.
Is that how it got? I did not know that.
408 different trials to cut through grease and grime.
Before they got it right.
Before they got it right. And I guess someone said, what should we call it? They said, we'll call it 409.
And I didn't know that. That
So
is
you gotta
a great
add that.
story. I'm going to add that in. That's a great story. And it's just when trust is low, people are either, you either one or two things when you feel that trust is very low. You either are hiding in a bomb shelter hoping people don't notice you and you're just trying to get paid and not get laid off, or you are you spend half of your time looking for the next place that you can be where you can find joy. I mean, we spend most of our waking lives at work.
Yes.
There's no way you want to be miserable for most of your waking life. We don't choose that as human beings.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that. I wouldn't say, hunker down in the bomb shelter, but I understand why you said that. But what I see people do and say to me is, I'm keeping my head down.
That's right.
I'm just getting the work done. And
that's the military, the hiding in the
yeah,
bomb,
no, I
but
knew
keeping
that.
your head down.
Yeah. But people say, I'm keeping my head down. I'm not looking up
Just
much.
trying to make it through the day.
Make it through the day.
And they know you're not bringing 100% of their work. They're just trying to make it through the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's you're right. That's not a way to live.
No.
Not a way to
And
live.
your top talent, who have a lot of choices, they won't live that way for long.
That's true.
And then that's the whole concept. When people leave, they more often than not leave their manager or their situation versus leaving the organization.
You're right about that. You're right about that. So what are some of the common mistakes that you see, either mistakes or obstacles, that you see among leadership? What do you see?
A lot of times it depends on the where they are in their leadership journey.
Okay.
Young leaders make a different portfolio of mistakes than very seasoned leaders. A lot of times young leaders will come in with, it's like I came into my first job in the 82nd Airborne as a brand new lieutenant. I'm a graduate from West Point, graduate from the Field Artillery Officer School. I had this whole book of leadership stuff. I am ready. I know it all. And then I get my team, and as I'm starting to learn my job, I realized I didn't know anything. That literally I just had this whole book of knowledge that didn't necessarily apply directly to the real world. And so a lot of times what young leaders do is they don't stop and let themselves be taught. They think they have to know it all in the very first job, and you don't.
You don't.
You can walk up to your team and say, I don't know anything, teach me. And when they start teaching you and you start listening, you start building that credibility because they're going, okay, this is my leader, and so I am teaching my leader and they're listening, and that credibility creates a level of trust. And then while they're teaching you, you're building your capability. And so it's that CCT that starts all over again, and it's just a powerful thing, and it's worked in every job in the military. It's worked in every job in the civilian land. I question that if I'm not doing something that doesn't contribute to the teams or the organizations or my capability, our credibility or our trust, I question why am I doing it, and should it be a top 10 priority?
I love that. I love that. And one thing that you said reminded me of my first professional job. And I was placed to supervise hourly workers in a General Motors plant. And they had children my age, and some of them had grandchildren. They'd worked there for a long time, so there was nothing that I could teach them. They had to teach me.
Right.
And so I came humble. They knew I was their supervisor. I knew it. They knew I knew nothing, and I knew I knew nothing. But I didn't lead with rank.
That's right.
Because I had nothing.
That's right.
So to your point, that's a valuable lesson. So let's go up a notch. So you said, it depends on the season of the
Yes.
leadership. So what is a middle manager? What do they need to learn?
So they tend to have gotten past sort of the first mistakes of thinking they know everything. They tend to be very astute at creating sort of this learning model. I think what they start to get into is trying to find their authentic leadership style. Right, so now you're not just a junior leader trying to just survive. You really now you have progressed, and now you have to figure out how you want to lead. You want to have to figure out what you want to be known for. What are your principles that you roll out to your team that they can count on you every time? And so figuring out that style and then making sure they're focused on building trust. They're focused on doing the things that build trust, the empathy, the appreciation, the power of leadership character, that they're just starting to get a feel for that and understand what that means as they're in that middle management level.
And then what about the senior people? Because they make mistakes
That's right.
too.
Most times on it's about vision. There is power in leadership vision. And usually as a junior leader, you're not really the vision person, right? It's that senior leader that's establishing that long range vision. They're establishing the values. They're establishing the culture code. And so what happens then, they are now setting the tone for organizations, for massive amounts of teams. And so being able to figure out what's going on. What you see is that they understand their style, but now sometimes you get to a point where you haven't created processes to listen. You haven't created organizational health surveys to see how the organization is feeling. You haven't done spot checks to make sure your values and your vision, what you rolled out at the top level, is understood and heard and can be repeated back in the same way at every level of the organization. So it's just a different level. So now listening becomes important. Intellectual curiosity. The higher up you go, the more important intellectual curiosity is to your success, where you can ask questions, where you're willing to get feedback. Sometimes the higher we go, the less feedback we want. We start to think that we got here because who we are is working for us, and then you tend not to be as open to feedback, especially when it's not positive feedback, and you tend to bubble and cocoon yourself, and you're not hearing what's going on. And so the senior leadership mistakes are much different than you see at the other levels, because it's more so of they're self-inflicted. It's more so you have a lot of control over your destiny and what happens, and you just have to make sure you're taking that extra step to building in listening processes. You're taking that extra step to get out of the office and go have lunches and dinners all up and down the ranks, that you're doing skip level one-on-ones, that you are curious about what everyone thinks in the organization. You're curious about what your constituencies and your customers thinks in that.
No, that's a very thorough answer, which I love. And it also assumes that the people around you feel comfortable giving feedback.
That's right.
Because you as a leader could foster that. I want you to tell me how great I am. I want you to yes all my ideas and don't bring anything that I don't like.
That's right.
And so if you're creating that kind of environment, to your point, we could probably name corporations that are no longer around, executives who are no longer around, because they created that environment and they weren't listening, they weren't doing that wonderful list that you provided, but even more so, they surrounded themselves with people who weren't honest.
That's right. And they surrounded themselves with people that looked like, felt like, talked like, and could support their pre-established view of everything.
Exactly.
And so and as a senior leader, you can cocoon yourself, and you can surround yourself with people that don't feel comfortable going against the norm. They don't feel comfortable challenging what you're saying.
Right.
But there are so many tools leaders can build in. You know, one of the things that we used in the military that I used with all my teams, especially higher up we go, we call it red teaming, and that goes back to the days of Russia and red team, blue teams. But red teaming means you played the competition and you played devil's advocate. You know, I would always have someone in the room and I would pass it around. We would either pass a special pen around or a ball around, and you would never know, and you had the job of playing devil's advocate. It didn't matter what was going on in the room, and it actually didn't matter what you actually believed. You had the job to challenge our thought process, to challenge our suppositions and our
assumptions
and our methodology. And so you get that conversation, especially when someone is willing to challenge and that person is not stomped out, then other people start to feel it's okay to challenge. And that's about that trust, that they feel like it's okay to bring up when you don't agree. Some of the best ideas that we have executed as teams started as, you know, disagreements, started as this doesn't make any sense, why don't we do X, Y, and Z? And somewhere in between was a great answer.
Yeah, they built upon it.
Right.
Yeah, this has been wonderful, and we're nearly out of time.
Oh, man.
So I have to ask you, first of all, you have to come back.
Absolutely. Love
so
to.
We'll have you back very shortly. But in the 30 seconds we have, so what is your new beginning for the rest of 2019?
The new beginning. I am overly focused on a lot of executive coaching now. And so I have, initially, when I rolled out my company, I thought it'd be, you know, 50% keynote speaking and then 40% on workshops and 10% executive coaching. But I have found just a different level of passion. And now executive coaching is a third of the business, and it has been more gratifying than I could have ever imagined. And so there's this double down on that executive coaching, that process, and being connected and saying yes to a lot more executive coaching opportunities that have presented itself.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Mel, thank you so much
the
for
pleasure was all
joining
mine.
us, and thank you for tuning in to New Beginnings with Karen Delk.